Hello and welcome to Stars and Stripes Election Predictions. This is going to be a new channel that I've begun for exactly that, election predictions, and we'll be doing various things, election nights, and sometimes maybe just discussing polls and things. I also want to keep videos pretty brief on this channel, so with that said, let's just get right into it, and this is going to be a 2022 Senate prediction. I'm just going to basically run through all the states, and we'll see where they stand. So beginning with the Democratic safe states, these are what I would rate as safe. Maybe Washington actually could be a likely. It looks like most of the predictions either say safe or likely, so it's probably going to be right around that 15% threshold. If we look at where it was in 2018 with the Senate race, it was a little over almost 17 points. But then if we go back to 2016, in Senate races, it was pretty comfortable, the state of Washington. We really haven't had a lot of close races in that state, but it looks like it could be just a little bit closer and inside that likely margin, although Biden did win there by 20 points. Okay, actually, I think I am going to have that as a safe race. And by the way, as for my characterizations, basically, less than 1% is a tilt, and then greater than or equal to 1%, but less than 5 is a lean, and then 5 or more, but less than 15 is what I would say is likely, and then 15 or more is solid. So those are my characterizations. So going on here with the Republican states, these are also pretty obvious. So already we're down to about a dozen competitive races, but that's not exactly true. The state of Missouri, I just wanted to talk about really briefly. So former Governor Eric Greitens here is potentially going to be the Republican nominee. If he is, there's a chance that this race could become very competitive, or at least somewhat, forcing Republicans to spend money there. But at this point, it's not a certain thing, so I will assume he is not the nominee, and in that case, it's going to be a solid Republican state. Even if he is the nominee, there's a chance that he would still win. In fact, he probably would. Iowa is another interesting one. In this state, Chuck Grassley usually wins by very big margins, but this time the polls are showing that it will be a little bit closer in Iowa. I don't buy that it's going to be 3 or 8 points, or 3 or 5. 8 is a little bit closer to what I think could happen, but realistically, I think it's probably going to be somewhere around maybe 12 to 14 points. So I am going to do it, put it as a likely state, but that could change. It could go back to solid pretty easily. Continuing on here with Republican likely states, Lisa Murkowski will probably be reelected in Alaska. That is basically a three-way race because of the ranked choice voting system. I believe there's 2 Republicans and a Democrat there. In the state of Florida, I think that's going to be a likely Republican state as well, which might be a bit of a surprise. This is a state that Democrats have really I think it's kind of confounded Democrats. They just cannot seem to win Florida, and they're not losing it by huge margins. It's not like it's moved the way Ohio or Iowa has to the right. It's just a state that they can't seem to win, even though it's consistently close in presidential and Senate results and gubernatorial results as well. So Florida, I do think Marco Rubio, being quite popular, will win by a bigger margin, but even if it was a less popular incumbent, I don't think it would be a very likely chance of Democrats winning. And then Ohio, you have J.D. Vance there, and I think he's probably pretty likely to win. Looking at some polls there, Tim Ryan obviously has name recognition, but as to whether he could really stand a chance, I mean, this is still Ohio we're talking about. I know that these polls look very, very good for Democrats, but polling in Ohio really since the Trump era and post-Trump era, it's not been accurate at all. It's been very heavily in favor of Democrats, so I don't really believe those polls much at all. There's no way that Ryan wins by anything like 9 points. If he did win, it would be something like probably 1 point or less, but I really don't think he wins there at all. Moving on, we'll go to, I would go to Democratic likely states, but I actually don't have any. So moving on to Republican lean states, North Carolina is the first one. And this is a state that Donald Trump did win by a pretty, an okay margin. 1.3% is not great, but he won it by 3.7 in 2016. This is another one, a lot like Florida, where Democrats cannot seem to really win here. You know, Tom Tillis won by a small margin, slightly outperforming Trump there in 2020. It's one of those that the Republicans keep winning, but by even smaller margins than Florida. Democrats have a chance potentially in statewide races here over the next few years, but I don't think that this race in particular is a really good chance. I think Ted Budd will probably win that one. Moving on to Wisconsin, I think Ron Johnson is also the heavy favorite to win. This is, I mean, really, because the Republicans have so many retiring incumbents, well, really, it's just a couple, but because of that, a lot of these competitive races, and this is a very Democratic favored map, so a lot of these competitive races are leaning towards the Democrats simply because they have the incumbents there, or there are retiring ones. So in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, there's Republican incumbents who are not running for re-election. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. In fact, we are going to, I'll look at Wisconsin real quick, the polls there. But again, I mean, Ron Johnson, he's usually not popular. He really isn't now, but he tends to win re-election even without that. There's only one poll, and it doesn't show him ahead. But I have a hard time believing that one. Moving on to Democratic lean states, I would say New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan won in 2016, and she won by a very, very thin margin. And I do think she's likely to win re-election. She is the incumbent now, and if Chris Sununu, the governor there, had decided to run for the Senate position, I think there's a pretty good chance he would have won. But unfortunately for the Republicans, he decided to run for governor again. So I think that one probably stays blue. There is a chance it could flip, but I have it as a lean, maybe 3 or 4 points for that seat. In the state of Colorado, this is one that, I mean, it's been moving dramatically towards the Democrats, really. And in the state of Colorado, Biden won there in 2020 by 13.5 points. That is a very significant margin. But I think that the important thing to remember is this is a state that has very handily rejected Donald Trump. I mean, if we look at the presidential elections again here, he also lost it in 2016 by 4.9, so not nearly as big of a margin, but it just doesn't seem to be, and it's already moving to the left. It's already turning blue, so it's not a real surprise there. I think that the Democrats will carry that one, and I think Michael Bennet wins re-election by, again, maybe 4, close to 5 points potentially. I think that would be a pretty realistic thing. That one could definitely slip into the likely column, but for now I'm going to put it as a lean. I think it'll be fairly close. Moving on, I have one last lean Democratic state, and that is Pennsylvania, and this would be a Democratic pickup, of course. John Fetterman is running against Dr. Oz in the state of Pennsylvania, which was not exactly a race we expected. Now, of course, Trump won that state very narrowly in 2016. Biden flipped it back by 1.2 percentage points. In 2018, the Senate race there went by 13% to Senator Bob Casey. And then in the governor's race, also there, that was a pretty huge win for Tom Wolf by 17 percentage points. So that one is a blue-leaning state. This really should be a Republican-lean state. This is potentially a red wave year with a Democrat in the White House, and it's a midterm year. But because there's a retiring incumbent and the Republicans have nominated a pretty bad candidate, just from the standpoint of electability, Dr. Oz definitely does not have the advantage that a normal Republican politician would. And I think if we were looking at a situation like that, this would probably be a pretty heavy Republican advantage. But because this is the nominee, I think that John Fetterman is probably going to win and pick that seat up for the Democrats. The last three are really where it comes down to it. And I think they're all going to be tilts. And you could pretty much make a strong argument in all three of these for either side. The one I feel most confident about, I'll start with, is Arizona. I think Mark Kelly probably wins Arizona by a tilt margin, potentially a lean margin, getting over a percentage point victory. I think that's possible, but I do think probably that is going to be really, really close. Though I do think Kelly is just a strong incumbent, and we've seen Democrats doing very well in Arizona as of late. So I think that's probably who wins that one. In Georgia and Nevada, again, you could really make any argument. Starting with Nevada, if we look there right now, 538 has it as an exact tie, 50-50. This is going to be close. Laxalt is a good candidate. We've seen a lot of Republican candidates who are not very electable, and that's part of the problem I think that the Republicans are facing. But Laxalt is a much better candidate than somebody like Dr. Oz. So I think he takes it by a tilt margin. I think it's going to be razor thin. And then we move on to Georgia. And that, of course, was the state that put Democrats over the top in 2020 with the Senate elections there, both of them going to the Democrats. And Raphael Warnock won by 2.1%, but Jon Ossoff only won by 1.2%. So we will see. That had more to do, again, with the Republicans running. In this case, Herschel Walker is not proving to be a good candidate. And for that reason alone, I will move this to a tilt Democratic state. But there is still a very solid chance that Republicans could pick up the state of Georgia. And again, in those tilt states in particular, but even in a couple others, you could definitely make arguments for either side. So let me know what you think is going to happen in these states, and whether or not the Democrats or the Republicans will control the Senate, what you think. In this case, of course, 50-50 with the vice presidency would mean Democrats control. This is a favorable map for them, though, so that's something to consider. If this were a different Senate cycle, we might be looking at a very different situation. But again, let me know what you think, and that is all, and I will see you in the next video.